Welcome and good afternoon to my session of the rejects, by the rejects, for the rejects. Anyone know where that is inspired from, the title? I thought I'd spit it out, but I want to also have fun with my audience. So, not to say this is my first conference talk, so we'll see how it goes. Yes, exactly. So this is Abraham Lincoln's quote, essentially, that says, of the people, by the people, for the people. And of course, he was talking about democracy in the US and the federal government. And I'm not going to go too much into the historical context of that. But my inspiration was to basically convey to you the democratic nature of community conferences with a strong leader at the apex to drive that project to its completion. So without further ado, I'll start with some of the lessons that I've learned from organizing Cloud Native Rejekts. You can see some of that branding all over. And I've been organizing this for some time now, but I really inherited the project from these two magnificent folks. You'll see Chris Cole at the inset there. He's the CEO and founder of Kinfolk, now part of Microsoft. He was the concept guy. He was the one who came up with the idea of, just sitting by and thinking of all of these wonderful talks that were rejected from KubeCon, and just thinking of why can't we just create a platform to give a second chance to some of these wonderful talks? Because a lot of them are wonderful. And this was back in 2019. And I also have to give absolute credit to Lexi Nadolski, who hit the ground running with this project in 2019, and she organized the first few conferences. I've inherited this project from them. So if you've already known about this for a few years, a lot of credit goes to them already. So I give them kudos all the way, and I think they've done a magnificent job of kind of just setting the stage and giving this platform, and my job now is to inherently make it grow little by little and see what its scope is with future iterations. So I'll talk a little bit more. I know I've touched upon a key concept already that I wanted to cover today, which is the idea of a core concept or a brand story. And I also want to bring another term into the mix, which is a brand recall factor. Now, a lot of folks may have heard some of these terms in context of either PR or advertising or marketing. And I can tell you one thing, that it's a term that, especially brand recall value and brand factor and brand story, these are terms that could be used and applied in terms of a community conference building if you're especially thinking of something from the get-go. If you have a brand new concept in mind and you think, yes, this I think would benefit this kind of target audience. And I'll get more into specific examples later. But if you ever think that, yes, I probably have it in me to start my own community conference, this talk especially would like to focus on, or I'd especially like to give you some points to focus on in terms of how to think about it rather than the specific messaging or the tools and the things that you would figure out by doing your own research, and you would know, for instance, oh, this is the best tool for CFPs and this is the best tool for registration, things like that. But in my journey, I realized that no one really sat me down and talked to me about the big picture, whereas that is what really matters in the end. You are trying to give the attendee an experience. And if you walk your way back from the end result, you'll actually realize that, oh, these are things that I should be thinking about. And these are things that are sort of things that you would delegate to experts in the field, great designers, great concept folks, and all of that. But sitting with them, really discussing it through, and understanding how it fits your idea of what your conference should be about is key. And I'll give you a very small example of this, for instance. We tried to play around with themes and colors and of the sort with different events. And you'll see a blue graphic, you'll see a green graphic below that, and you'd see brief after that which says back to black. And I think of the Amy Winehouse song, and I also think of how it kind of matches the mood of Rejekts, where it's supposed to be gritty, it's supposed to be edgy, and it's good to be back to that same concept of yes, it's this edgy, small little conference that's happening before KubeCon, because our community of rejects, people who didn't get into KubeCon, can make it to this one instead and possibly talk. So it's something that's true to brand. It's something that's true to the whole thought process, and it's something that gives you this whole idea of, oh, if I just see these colors at random, I would think about it. I would at least think about that conference, and it kind of helps you to associate memory with a sensation or a feeling of, I was there, I liked it, and this is what I really liked. I was part of like a gang of rejects. I was part of a community of rejects. I know we like to use the word community a lot, but it's also that feeling of camaraderie and warmth of like, oh, we're like-minded folks, and I think of this, and you thought of that, and we know these are great ideas, and this didn't get through to the big conference, but here we are. This is our conference. And you kind of make a society of people that way. You make a gang of it. And yeah, so this is something that I just wanted to highlight in terms of just something as simple as a theme, as bold colors that you could choose and you could think of, and it becomes part of your brand story. It becomes the story of your journey with the conference and the journey that you take your attendees through, and they know what they're signing up for each time. Now that I've talked a little bit about it, and I realized very consciously, very early on when I was preparing for this presentation, that I really want to ask people what they think of in terms of like just something that gives them a great sort of association with a brand or a product or a service that you've seen recently, and it really really moved you. So think about something and let me know. Like this is something that I'm just trying to make interactive, and I'm happy to bounce off of ideas with the audience. Can anyone think of something? And you can think of a sitcom, you can think of a film you watched, a project you saw. Like I'm really broadening the scope here just to show you that in the end, you really need to have one clear concept, and you can build a brand around it. And that brand can have recall value with a lot of these things like, doing the right colors, having the right branding that goes over and over, creating a recall value. I mean, these are really the steps that I would talk of when I'm thinking of, oh, shall I start a community conference of my own? Or I have a community conference, but I don't know if I have a storyline associated with it. I don't know if it's just something that's going to be, or I don't know if it's going to be a conference that's going to be lost in a sea of conferences. Particularly that, and that can very well happen if you don't have the edge and you don't have a unique story to tell. So yeah, I didn't see any hands up, so I'm gonna go ahead and share something that I thought of myself. So everyone's watched The Office, right? Yeah, so funny, and I'm sure like, everyone kind of goes back, at least I do. I keep going back to it, and I still chuckle, and I still laugh very hard at a lot of the situational drama that's happening. Now, if I boil down the concept, for instance, and I think of it, it's just, you can really summarize it in 2 words. I was thinking of a phrase, but I'm like, no, it's office humor, essentially. Now, if I think of office humor, and I think of a conference that, would be relevant to our spaces, the kind of community work that we do, I instantly could think of, I've heard some of these talks which go over user stories and developer experiences. And they almost always follow this arc or this storyline where, everyone's like, this broke, that happened, and this wasn't supposed to happen, but that kind of happened. And there are moments of humor interspersed throughout, whether you laugh out loud or not, but that's also kind of the idea that you're playing with it. You're telling a story. You're also stating facts that this really did happen, by the way. This is my story. This is my experience. And if you could, use that idea, for instance, and I'm really thinking of, off the top of my head, and I'm thinking that if office humor works so well and everyone loves to laugh, and that's a great attendee experience in itself, you gave people lots of laughs. People come to your conference because, well, they learn something, but they also laugh hard. It's nice. It's a great starting point. You can grow from there. And what you can do in that is essentially, and my idea was you basically have developer stories, but written in the form of a humorous script. That's, so your call for proposals clearly states that yes, we invite user stories, specifically, focusing on, and yes, of course, you can pick topics if you like and all of that, particularly if you want the scope to be really narrow at the very beginning and then broaden it later. But if you want to start very specifically and you want to focus it on a very specific topic or topics, start off with that and go like, yes, but the prime requirement is that it's written in a humorous way to invoke some kind of cackles, laughs, whatever. And what you're doing with that is, and I'm not saying this has to be it. I'm not saying this is, like an idea that I'm going to roll with later. But it's a way to kind of get people hooked, to get people think of how they're writing, how they're presenting, and how they're speaking at conferences. It might also interest people because, well, there's another style of writing that you now need to develop, or storytelling, and that could be a talent some folks could be interested in and would want to develop. And at the same time, if it doesn't attract a lot of submissions right away, that's not necessarily a disheartening thing. It means that you're doing something really pointed, really specific, really true to your core brand, and your brand values will ensue from it. So, believe me, that is more of an organic process. But being clear about the fact that this is what I do want to focus on, and let's see what happens with it. And I do have some budget, and I want to start off with something like this. It could grow into something later, but this is the starting point. That's actually, that's something that would work pretty well. So most of these are simple ideas, but when you kind of put them together, you could make some sense of it, and you could start off from that point. So humor, but with user stories. And this reminds me of the IT Crowd, which is another great sitcom. And a lot of people used to tell me, but it's really dry humor. And I'm like, yes, but it's still in that category. So humor can be the white bracket, and that could be a means to the end, which is the actual story, which is the user stories and the developer stories and all of that. And and while you have that, think of things that are great for brand recognition. So you also want to, now that you've come up with a concept like that, you also want to come up with, a logo and colors that you associate with your conference that go a long way. And I'll come to different tenets of also supporting how you grow the conference. But I think this would be like initial starting points, and to think about the core concept, to think about what your core values are that come from it and how you would drive that later. All right, so I do want to also take an audience poll here. I'm sorry I'm making you do a little work, but I do want to kind of bounce off of your ideas, and I think that's going to be great. There's a little bit of a poll here. If you can scan that QR code, it's anonymous, so you don't really have to sign in or anything. And yeah, we'll have fun with this. Has everyone scanned it? Yeah, good. All right, so, oh, great. Are we getting results already? That's wonderful. So I don't actually need to walk you through the questions. I think I've talked about some of these aspects already, but as you can see, how are you all getting the right answer? I didn't mark correct answers for a reason, but this is fairly clear. I can't tell you that how many times I've actually worked with collaborators and teams, and everyone in their own well-meaning capacity is like, oh, we'll find a sponsor, and we'll get an investment rolling. And I'm like, you can go all the way. You can plan everything to its very core, and you will still fall back if there is no initial budget, if you don't have a financial underwriter, if you're not clear about, will there be some kind of investment coming in? Do you even have like an initial investment or like some kind of event fund that you can fall back on? And you really, really need to get that clear before you can even start off with anything. So all of these conceptual ideas are wonderful. And you can do it yourself, believe me. If you just want to keep going with that, that's wonderful. But if you're very serious about it, this would be stage 2. So you come straight from the creative to the absolutely pragmatic side of things. And that's just essentially how conference planning works. All right, there's more. Just 2 more, I promise. This one and another one. How important do you think the concept of an event is? I think you're all really, really amazing at this. This is great. Like, of course, I've actually heard people go like, average. An event is an event. A conference is a conference. What difference would it make? And I also see where they're coming from. I don't think I'm necessarily critical of that take, because I understand when it just becomes very mechanical and it's about, well, we need to do this. There is an allotted budget, and this is what we need to do, and these are the folks that you'll have, and what difference would it make either way, this way or that way? And I get it. Like, usually people do fall in that average bracket, but this is nice. This is a good crowd. So I'll tell you why it's very important, because if you're making all of that, I mean, if you're essentially efforting so much, you do want a return on investment. And I'm not just talking about investment of funds. That's absolutely important. Your sponsors will ask you about, hey, what happened here or there? And it will be different from sponsor to sponsor, because some people do know the nature of your event. And when they're sold on the idea, then they don't have any more questions. Then it's just like, I know what this conference does. I'm convinced. I like the community it's built, and I like the folks that I get to meet event after event, and that's enough. But essentially, what it also is important for is to then further the messaging of your event. So you do want to think about a unique concept. It is the starting point. I know I probably also had a few conversations earlier yesterday, where I was talking to people, and I did try and ask some of these questions already, and it did seem like, in a sea of conferences, you don't really remember which one was which. But one of the factors that does remind you is, how did I feel? What did I feel there? What did I actually feel after that conference? Did it make me feel anything, or was it just like a blur? So you don't want to be that blur, especially if you're the one who's kind of behind all of this, and it's your community conference. You certainly don't want to be that blur. And one way of doing it is to, of course, work on, do we have power or no? Yeah? Okay. Yeah? Oh, great. I see. It was just sleeping. Okay, good. Yeah, so that's something I just really wanted to emphasize on. And finally, how would you start? And you can share an anecdote, you can share a story, you can share a word. It doesn't matter. Just anything that, a starting point for you. How would you start? Oh, boy. Yeah. But yeah, overthinking, I like this point too. I tend to do that sometimes. So I will tell you that overthinking is the other issue. It happens a lot, which is why it's always nice to at least have a small team. So when you're brainstorming, someone or the other can always pick that up and go like, I think you've been too far down that road, so you need to stop. Yeah, that's great. Rough guidelines is also good. I mean, I think that would also stem from, again, like, it doesn't have to be a very amazing concept or anything, but even if you want to start off from the very basic, like you want a focus group for Kubernetes experts. That's all your conference should be about in your mind. If you want to start with something like that, just kind of know that that's your point, the starting point, and then you don't just enlarge the scope to include everyone. Because the inclusion aspect is something that you need to brainstorm with your team again to make it more relevant to the people you're actually inviting. You don't just want it to be something that's so open-ended that a lot of the folks question the relevance of that conference for themselves. So you don't already want to be on that boat. So it's good to start small with a narrow scope and really be clear about your audience. Okay. Yay, wonderful. Thank you all for your ideas. I will now go back to, here we go, okay. So that's Andy and I. opening in Chicago. I wonder if some of you know Andy Randall. Yeah. Oh, great, yes, Danielle's here. So yes, yeah, this was us giving the opening for Cloud Native Rejekts in Chicago last year. And Andy also walked through some of the statistics for the CFP and all of the other data. So in a sense, the stuff that we've discussed so far, I would put them in these 4 sort of facets. These are the tenets, I would say, of thinking of a brand new community conference and how you can start from scratch. And I would actually insist that they're in consecutive order if I were to really be part of a planning team, because you really, again, shouldn't underestimate who the financial underwriter is or would be and make it very explicit, especially with a team of external collaborators. A decision maker, believe me, more often or not, this is the problem. You have a lot of opinionated folks on the table, very well-meaning, amazing opinions, but someone has to drive the project. Really, someone has to take decisions. And not everyone's going to like it. So kudos to whoever gets up and goes like, I can do this. And I don't mind, getting all the hate for it later, but I'll do this. I'll be that brave face. So yes, please assign a decision maker. Either vote for someone who you think would be good in that position, or if there's a clear mandate for a certain project planner, accept that they will take some decisions on the basis of the information that they have, which may not align with some of the things that you may have wanted to do with the project. And I know I keep referring to the event as a project, but it is. It is a project. So it is a project. In my eyes, it's also a product. In my eyes, it's also a service. And it's one of those things that, I think the shelf life for it is like really narrow. And once it's there and it's gone, then it's gone. But yeah, I mean, you keep working towards, especially if you're working towards something that you're doing consecutively, over and over again, think of it as a very important product, a service, a project at your end, and the goals that you're trying to achieve with it. There's also dates and timelines, and vendors and suppliers. And yes, according to me, the vendors and suppliers do come in the end. So you may know a lot of folks in the city, in the region, in the place that you're trying to plan an event or a conference, but I won't make verbal agreements or deals with anyone before I'm sorted with budget, decision-making, dates and timelines. And if I have to actually think about dates and timelines, I do advise market research. I do advise thinking about it in terms of what time of the year, what timeline would work, and be realistic about the goals. I know a lot of people who would just spring into action and go like, this takes 2 minutes, and that takes 5 minutes. And yes, if you do it right then and there, yes, but the back and forth, and often communications with people will work that way. The back and forth, the clarifications around a certain service or a certain vendor or a certain supplier, these things take time. So I would give it time. I wouldn't just assume something takes a few minutes and it'll be done, because if you attend events of this scale, there's a lot of work that goes behind it. And it seems very seamless because it's made to seem that way. You as an attendee shouldn't be experiencing any of the obstacles that the planners or the organizers do face. Yeah, and I'd like to talk about the building blocks now. I know we've discussed concept already, a little bit of the audience and some about the results. So I'll get straight to it. If I think of audience, I would think of the specific demographic. I wouldn't increase the scope right away. So if you are targeting something like, oh, engineering managers only for this focus group, and you want to start off with that, make sure you start off with that. And especially when you move through a small scale, do that often and understand that you can't include everyone right away. It's just the reality of your project. It's the reality of your budget. It's the reality of where you stand. If you can scale up drastically, make sure you have enough of a team there to handle enough queries, to handle enough questions about, what's what, and it's new, so people will have more questions than less. And yeah, and think of scale strategically, think of demographics strategically, and think of the statistic impact on the diversity and inclusion component. Now, I'm not just trying to push an agenda for, just kind of involving more and more folks that, you think are good within a certain focus group, but do think of representation in that spectrum, because that's the opportunity they get to slowly kind of get into the space. And sometimes it takes encouragement. So you as a planner cannot just leave it at something like, well, there's an established CFP process, there's a program committee, and that's that. They'll work it out. It often takes some encouraging for some people to even submit proposals. And you have to take the time to try and do that, especially if you see some potential in folks. Believe me, they'll be thankful. They'll be very grateful for it for years to come. And yeah, it's worth it. That's all I can say. And results. What are you driving at? Externally, of course, like once you have the external impact, which is you founded your brand, it's clear to everyone, you've kicked it off, you have a great project plan, you have great vendors and great suppliers lined up, and now you finally kind of have the event, and everyone's just showering it with praises, and you're like, yes, okay, so something's working here. Of course, there's a lot of feedback when you go on to do something new, which is great. But essentially draw energy from the idea that you see a certain amount of attendees, for instance, for a 2-day conference, and you do see about 200 attendees on the first day of the conference. And each time it happens, don't take it for granted. You are doing something right. People can just as easily not come. People can just as easily not choose to network or mingle. But they do come and say they also see that speaker elsewhere in other conferences, et cetera, and there's more conversations around collaboration happening. You're doing something right. So not everything looks like, like it's weighed in terms of analytics. Some of this is also some of the survey that you have to do on the ground. So you actually have to be present. You have to talk to people. You have to notice what opportunities people are finding, and some of them do get converted right there. So, and that helps you convey automatically internally, whether it's within your organization, your foundation, your company, that, hey, this is what we achieved. And I understand that a lot of companies need very specific stats for reports on impact, but this is a starting point, especially if you're starting off with something that's brand new and you're really trying to scale it. This is the way that you actually measure it, and get people to say good things about you on record, for sure. That's important, and it's not something you're coercing people to do, but especially people that are your ardent supporters. They should be willing to go all the way and say something on the record so you can actually use some of that good feedback to leverage it within your company to get more funding, to be able to organize it a lot more and with a better cadence. Yeah, and I'd like to talk about these aspects because I've zoned them down as perhaps the most significant aspects of scale and impact. And if you look at CFP, the call for proposals is always like I discussed, with an example. You want to make it as clear as possible, and you don't want to broaden it too much. People will submit things in any way that is even close to the vicinity of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve. So definitely work on what you think the process should be. The selection criteria, you can work with the program committee and work very closely with them, but also make sure that, when you do have a program committee in place, that you do have folks that you believe will, understand what you're trying to do with this conference. So that's very important. So don't just go for, this name or that name and they're available and yay, that's great. Yes, good sometimes from a promotion point of view. I will not deny that. But yeah. I think it's more important to sort of really stay true to your core values and take that decision accordingly. Tools. I can go on to say, oh, like I use pre-talk, someone else uses Sessionize. Sessionize is an industry standard, go for it. I've worked for this and that. But I really don't want to do that because I think tooling really comes down to, again, the scale of your event, your conference, and how you want to plan it. So if this is not something that, for instance, like, You probably don't need sessionize if you do work with pre-talks and it works great for you, and it's something that, that is accessible to the team, and a lot of people can brainstorm and help you with it. Go for that tool. You don't have to go for a standard that you think is a more viable option because more people are using it. Yes, of course, there's registration, but here I'd like to emphasize on having more of the local community involved. And by that, I mean literally specifically in the region, in the city, in the area. Try and reach out to those groups. Try and enlighten them about the event that you're having, especially if it's something that you're organizing there once every few years, or if it's like once a year or biannually or something like that. You want to try and get the pulse there. You do want to try and understand whether the local community itself appreciates it, if there are people who find benefit from attending this conference, even if it's something as small as, oh, I kind of got to practice, like hone my skills on writing humor, for instance, or even presenting a user story, this use case I was working on, and I just wanted to talk about it. So it goes a long way as well, and you want to try and do something like that. And promotions, yes. Influencers, but not everyone, again. And you don't want to kind of, there's this thing of content marketing where sometimes too much doesn't necessarily mean that it's impactful. It just means it's too much. I think the audience, especially in these communities, in open source and aligned communities of Kubernetes and Cloud Native, they're far too smart. They do understand the pulse of things. They're quite well informed on their own. So it's not like they need to see one of everything that's happening all the time, And so think of the pace of your social media strategy, for instance. Do you want to necessarily, talk about your venue, for instance, and the CFP and the website and some update here and there, or someone who's going to speak? Do you want to do all of that in a spate of 2 weeks, or do you want to kind of pace it out a little by little, so you can also get more organic engagement on posts, and you can go like, so this worked then, this worked because of this time of the month or this time of the week, and things like that. So be mindful of those kind of decisions, because those little decisions can go a long way in even informing you if you need, for instance, paid marketing. Do you need paid marketing? Maybe you don't. Maybe organically you're doing so well that you actually don't need any kind of paid forums for marketing your event. So, and word of mouth. I've seen this personally with Rejekts, where there's a lot of people, a lot of folks who genuinely enjoy the conference, and they're not shy of talking about it with people, and good feedback and good word of mouth has its own positive impact. It spreads, word spreads, and everyone's like, yes, this is a conference that I want to take time for. And that's how it's done. Now, I can imagine if some of you may have been expecting this to be more detailed in terms of, so how do I start? Like step 1, 2, 3, 4. But my aim here was to really impart some pearls of wisdom, if I may, with my short time organizing this conference, about how to think of things from a bird's eye view. Because you may get involved in the little details and you think that's what makes the difference. And sure, it does in many cases. But it's really like, it's also about the big picture. So never lose sight of the big picture. Understand how you want to think about things. And yeah, that's how I would proceed. So this was my main aim, that, I could share possible insights that could be useful to some people who are even beginning to think of, maybe I have a great concept and I should start a community conference. Well, if you can check some of these check boxes at your end, you are ready, actually. Just make sure you have a budget, make sure you have a decision maker, and make sure you're not doing everything by yourself, for sure. Like, I'm a culprit there too. I'm not very good at responsibly delegating a lot, but I've learned through some experience that you need to do that from time to time. And yeah, trust the process. So that's about it from my side. I do want to end with some final thoughts, which is, while I said be mindful of your social media strategy, of your influencer marketing strategy, make sure you do take the time and the effort to promote your event. You don't want to not promote your event. That's not a good way to go either. There's not a lot that you can achieve through word of mouth, but it is effective in its own way. So a little mix of all of these aspects will make sure that you're set up for success. Check what's working in terms of your strategy, not just social media, for everything, for all of the different tenets that I did touch upon. Delegate responsibly. And by that, I also mean really think of who's committed to it and who has the time and who has varying priorities and what can you do about it, and delegate in a way that it's an effective use of and useful use of their time and yours. And negotiate often. This is my favorite, I think, personally. not because I'm just going to haggle things through, but also because I think people don't realize the importance of talking to certain vendors and having multiple conversations with them. You might just go like, yes, we did have one chat. I'm going to do one site visit. That's the end of it. When you talk to them and when you really kind of give them the entire, really sort of welcome them into the scope of your event, show them what you're trying to do, show them what you're trying to achieve, your community giving aspects, et cetera, et cetera. Believe me, doors open because they suddenly want to be invested and in on it and throw in things for you to help you in the process. So yeah, I would always advise negotiating. And yes, own your mistakes. They're your own pearls of wisdom. I wouldn't have it in any other way. Of course, if they are shared mistakes, it's good to be clear about what your mistake is and so on and so forth. But owning them is something that's key. And lastly, if you are heading to Salt Lake City and you think you could make it to Rejekts, do register. Registration is free. That's an executive decision. So yeah, this is an example of how you kind of want to work with your core values and proceed event by event with it. And yeah, if you can't find the link from there, do find me on LinkedIn and I'll send you the link to register for free. And that's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Benazir.
Yep.
You certainly got me thinking.
Yeah.
I told you we are trying to put together a KCD, and
yeah.
I must tell you we did not start with the money.
Yeah.
we are talking location and suppliers and vendors. But
yeah.
Anyways, we have 2 more questions from the audience.
Right.
If you'd be so kind to answer them.
Sure. Respondable. So I wouldn't wait till the very last minute to send, key messages. If I know something's going wrong, for instance, like, something on the portal is not working or something like that, and it definitely directly impacts speakers, I would send a group message to speakers. If someone hasn't responded acknowledging it, I would follow up closely with them wherever I possibly could. And it may seem a little annoying, but in the end, it does the good deed of making sure they know what they need to know and that we're prepared with plan B. Yeah. What would be reasons to have a separate program selection committee? You mean a distinctly different program committee per event? Is that what you mean?
It's more like distinct from the organizers, maybe? So like external?
Yeah, I think that's basically to ensure that there's no bias in the selection process. For me, that's very important, to also have this broad spectrum of companies that you can have experts from. And there are different, ideally also there are different levels of technical expertise, or their focus areas are a little different. So they could do justice to, a range of proposals. And you'll have slightly different median scores in the end. So you can really go through all of those scores and take a very informed decision on who has really scored well across the spectrum. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much.